Ready to watch?
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for the fifth part of the 8-part webinar series on Amoris Laetitia. I am Michael Tyson, Director of Ministry Formation for NFCYM and the National Coordinator for the Strong Catholic Families Initiative, and I'm happy to be your host tonight. This Amoris Laetitia webinar series is brought to you by the Strong Catholic Families National Partnership, comprised of the National Catholic Educational Association, the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, and the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers. We are proud to bring you this unique series reflecting on Amoris Laetitia and its implications to ministry. We would like to thank our webinar sponsor, Paradises Day, for helping to make this series possible. Tonight's webinar session is entitled Assisting Families in Discerning God's Movement, and we wish to thank and acknowledge Julianne Stanz and the Diocese of Green Bay for providing us with an excellent master teacher video on which to reflect tonight. Before we begin, please note that all of your microphone connections have been muted. If you have questions or comments during tonight's presentation, please use the question box that appears in your GoToWebinar panel. To ask a question, click into the blank box area, type your question, and click Send. I want to point out that your certificate of attendance and a PDF of the presentation materials can be downloaded at any time from the handout section of your GoToWebinar panel. It will also be accessible to you in the follow-up email that contains the recording of this webinar. The webinar presentation will last about an hour with questions and answer portion at the end. After the conclusion of the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a brief evaluation. We thank you for doing that in advance. You will also receive an email in the next 24 hours with instructions on accessing this recorded webinar and a certificate of attendance along with the presentation files. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Andrea Kopp, Manager of Educational Resources for the National Catholic Educational Association, who will in turn introduce us to our impressive group of panelists. Welcome, Andrea, and our panelists.
Thank you, Michael. And Michael is behind the scenes tonight handling all of your questions and answers, so please keep them coming throughout the presentation. And before we introduce our panelists, I'd like us to start with prayer. Father John, will you get us started?
Absolutely. Let's begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, in you we contemplate the splendor of true love. To you we turn with trust.
Holy Family of Nazareth, grant that our families, too, may be places of communion and prayer, authentic schools of the gospel, and small domestic churches.
Holy Family of Nazareth, may families never again experience violence, rejection, and division. May all who have been hurt or scandalized find ready comfort and healing.
Holy Family of Nazareth, make us once more mindful of the sacredness and the inviolability of the family and its beauty in God's plan.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, graciously hear our prayer.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. We're going to get started with our introductions, but as we introduce ourselves, we want to find out a little bit about who's in our audience today. Michael is going to launch a poll, so if you don't mind responding to that as we introduce our panelists. I'll start with myself, Andrea Kopp. I'm the Manager of Educational Resources for NCEA. I've been with NCEA just a little over a year. Prior to that, my background was as a Catholic school teacher and in youth and young adult ministry. Father John, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Father John Belmonte is my name. I'm a Jesuit priest, and I am presently serving as the Superintendent of Catholic Schools in the Joliet Diocese, which is outside of Chicago in the western and southwestern suburbs of Chicago. grew up in Chicago, and very happy and delighted to be with everyone tonight.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Bob McCarty. I currently serve as the Chief Operating Officer for the Catholic Mobilizing Network to end the use of the death penalty in the United States. And on the side, I'm continuing to do pastoral ministry formation and training, and I'm serving as adjunct faculty at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, the University of Dallas, and a Catholic University in Washington, D.C.
Hello, I'm Laurie Presbus, and I'm President-elect of the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers. I live in Maryland, and I'm also the Education Director of the Catholics for Family Peace Education Initiative for a Catholic response for domestic violence. And I also work with the Christian Family Movement. Before I retired, I was the coordinator of family life for the Archdiocese of Baltimore, and my husband and I still volunteer in our parish in marriage preparation. I'm also a mom and a grandma.
Hello, everybody. I'm Maggie McCarty. I'm with the Catholic Climate Covenant. I'm the Associate Director there. I've been there just for a little more than a year. I have had the privilege of serving the Church for nearly 40 years in a variety of administrative, educational, ministerial, and teaching roles. And I'm just delighted to be able to be with you this evening. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Catherine Cornu. I'm the Diocesan Director of Faith Formation in Syracuse, New York. And I've been there for about 6 years. I've also served in the regional and parish levels for about 36 years total. But my primary vocation is wife and mother, and we have 6 sons, and they're wonderful wives and 3 grandchildren.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here tonight. And I just want to let our audience know that since we're talking about families, I've asked our panelists to share photos of their families throughout the presentation tonight. So as you see these photos coming up with our content, not only are we reflecting on Julianne's content in the Master Teacher video, but we're incorporating our own families into the presentation. And we're honored to share that with you. And Julianne's Master Teacher video was just rich with information and content, so we're going to try to break some of that up a little bit. She started off by telling us that we can only lead families as far as we've gone ourselves. She brings up the importance of pastoral preparation for leaders. How have you found this to be an important piece for yourselves and the catechist, teachers, and ministry leaders that you work with?
Well, I'll start. I found that being aware of my own family of origin and reflecting on them has helped me to be a better minister and accompanist to other families, to be aware of the family from which I came and to learn lessons about what they did well and what they could have done better. I think that being aware of our own families is a first start for us in ministry.
And I was with a group of diocesan directors in New York State who worked in partnership with the bishops to write and publish a document called Catechetical Leaders in the Third Millennium. And in it we talked about evangelization, changing parish landscape, cultural realities, technology, and most of all, family. And in this changing world of families and how we approach them, it's not the families of yesterday. So that document has helped frame conversations with catechetical leaders and then in turn catechists about how we're more present to the families and how we have to change our approach.
I can speak from the school's perspective about collaborating with families and how important that is. That really has been a focus for us in the Diocese of Joliet all the way through the organization, where even in our hiring process with new teachers, we focus on the importance of Catholic school teachers learning how to truly collaborate with families as part of their role as a teacher. And so the Holy Father's focus on families and its direct relation to Catholic schools is really important, and I think it's probably a reflection of his own experience as a teacher as well. is kind of understanding how schools and families really have to work together and collaborate together for the good of the children. I'd also add just a little note here that I'm here at a parish in the diocese where today we're hosting 3,000 students for a vocations conference with grade school students and then some religious education students and high school students for a vocation conference over the next 2.5 days. So very exciting and something that is really right in the wheelhouse of our whole discussion tonight.
Oh, that's fantastic. Michael, can you give us an idea of what our poll results were, please, as far as our audience?
Certainly. We have 50% who are on representing faith formation and religious education, another 25% each representing parent and family ministry and Catholic schools, although I happen to know at least one youth and young adult ministry person from Hawaii is on this webinar as well. So we would add that number into the youth and young adult ministry to note that we're mostly represented in those ministry areas that are listed.
And that's almost a hard one in ministry because it's hard to pick which one we do the most, because in ministry we often cross the streams, as they say. We multitask among ministries. Thanks for that, exactly. Michael. So let's talk a little bit about those ordinary family moments that Julianne referenced in her master teacher video. She describes a moment with her daughter at Mass where she was a lector and her little girl came kind of running up with her. And for a parent, you have a choice at that moment. You could kind of be embarrassed and shoo them back into the pew, but she made the choice to bring her daughter with her up to do the reading. Does the panel have any reflections on the importance of those ordinary family moments?
Call on me. Thank you.
Bob.
Good idea. I want to just call your attention to the slide there. That's me and our first grandson, Thomas. And so here's what's going on. When Thomas was 3 years old, Thomas has this real fascination with maps. We're not sure how that happened, but he loves maps. So he and I are on the floor. We're looking at this map of the United States, and Thomas says to me, "Papa, where do you live?" So I point on the map, like you can read a map or something. Then he says, "Papa, where do I live?" And I point again to where he lives. And then he says, as only a 3-year-old can do, "Papa, where does God live?" And and it was fascinating. And for people who've been in ministry for a while, you know that the ordinary moments really provide an extraordinary opportunity. So in my head, I'm thinking to myself, all my years of youth and young adult ministry and catechetical ministry has brought me to this moment, and I'm not going to say, "Go ask your mother." I am on top of my game here. I'm not going to say, "Let me get back to you." Nope, this is it. And I say to Thomas, Thomas, and I say, "Do you see this? See this whole map here? God lives in all of this." And then I take his hand and I put it on his heart, and I say, "And Thomas, God lives in your heart." And then I put it on my heart, and I say, "And God lives in my heart, and God lives in the heart of all of us." And he looks me right in the eye and he goes, "Pop, where's Ocean City, Maryland?" Because that's where he goes for summer vacation. So faith sharing was over. But there was a moment there where, it's like that God thing. And sometimes we forget that. I really do think children are connected. I think they're hardwired to connect around spiritual issues. And so that 3-year-old, I think it's a reminder to us as pastoral leaders, can we help provide parents the skills and the confidence to respond to those questions that I know their kids are going to be asking them. What a moment.
Love that story, Bob. That's just great. Our boys, as you might imagine, they were active, and we had our share of pets, and one time we had a guinea pig who passed this mortal coil, and the boys decided to have a funeral. They called all of their friends in the neighborhood. All the boys and girls got hats. They took their hats off and held them over their chest. Jonathan, our oldest, he did a prayer. "Piggers, you were such a good guinea pig, and you're a part of our family, and we're going to miss you, and God made you and gave you to our family," and all of this. And I'm sitting back, not sure if I should laugh or cry while I'm watching this. And one of the other boys takes up his trumpet and plays taps. So there was ritual. There was this sense of that's how we honor somebody who died. And I was really amazed because they'd never been to a funeral. But there was something that had taken root in them about honoring those that we love. And that was definitely a God moment in our family.
Dr. Lori, did you have any thoughts on that piece, those family moments?
I was thinking about weddings. We've had 5 weddings in our family, and the opportunities to meet the in-laws over the years have been real God moments, because it really pointed out to us, wow, you know, our child, our young adult was joining up with another crew of people that could have been from another country, although they were all Americans, but that those can be God moments when families come together.
Yeah, speaking of which, the picture there, that's my family, that crew in the left-hand corner. My boys bought me a selfie stick last Christmas, so we were testing it out. And just a plug for Catholic schools in these ordinary moments. I have to share my oldest son just turned 12, and we had a sleepover full of 6th grade boys come over, and they were playing video games, and I ordered pizza, and I carried these boxes of cheese pizza into the video game room, and they all stopped and blessed their food together without being told. I was so excited. I tweeted it. I tagged Arlington schools. Good job, Catholic schools. So some of those just little moments are really so powerful. Thank you for sharing some of those stories. So whose crew is this?
That's mine.
You're going to claim them, huh?
Those are my 6 boys, and they're lovely, lovely brides, our daughters of the heart, and grandchildren, and my mom.
Wonderful.
And my sweet husband. Yep.
Well, Julianne talks about the principle of flexible deliberation, how each individual and family journey is unique. She goes on to talk about a variety of family structures and how sometimes as ministry leaders we can fall into the trap of looking at certain family structures or situations as a problem that needs to be solved. Earlier in this Amoris Laetitia series we talked about accompaniment. How can this principle of flexible deliberation be explained in relation to ministry?
Well, the phone calls that come in at the diocesan level are interesting, as sometimes people are seeking help. And I had a mother recently who called, and she's divorced, she's moving, her ex-husband doesn't want to take her daughter to church, and she can't get her to religious ed every week, and she wants her to make her first communion. And is there any way that anybody can help me? Now here's a woman of faith, she's trying hard, she's in a bad situation. You know, the rules don't apply. Sorry, we do it, you know, Sunday mornings between the 2 masses. So I was able to put her in touch with a parish that was willing to be very flexible, to work with her, to have her mentor her child at home. And whenever she could get to Mass, get to Mass. But know that God was in the journey and that we as church were there to accompany her in that journey.
Yeah, Catherine, I like that image that you're providing. It's that image of flexible accompaniment. I think people in pastoral ministry, we know that relationships are critical. We know that relationships are the starting point and not the rules. And sometimes we get caught up. I mean, sometimes it's easy when you're in full-time parish or school work that we are the keeper of the rules, but we forget that at the heart of the ministry is the relationships we form. And sometimes we just got to remind ourselves that parents are trying the absolute best they can. I really do believe they want what's best for their kids. They want what's best for their family. They're dealing with all kinds of pressures. And so I think it's important to remember that flexible accompaniment means we start where they are, that they're the starting point, and that we begin to see parents, we begin to see them as partners in the faith journey, not problems to be solved, not obstacles, but partners, because they want what's best for their kids. And as pastoral leaders, how can we help support them in their faith journey with their families and with their young people? But the starting point is, where are they and what's their lived reality, and how do we move forward from there?
Right.
I like this. Go ahead.
Oh, this is a good time to remember that families come in so many different shapes. Sometimes people don't consider themselves a family unless they have their own children. But everyone is a member of a family. And so when we talk about family ministry, we can remind people that that's about the family from which you came. You might be an adoptive parent. And we should always be aware of couples that are experiencing infertility. So just that flexible deliberation helps us to have a sensitive eye.
I was simply going to add that for any Catholic school administrator or Catholic school teacher, this principle of flexible deliberation is really an important one because it's really what happens every day in Catholic schools, at good Catholic schools, where together the educational professionals that are there, administrators and teachers, are working with the students, being both deliberate and flexible in trying to meet the needs of students and their families. And so it really is, I think, a hallmark of Catholic schools that this sort of thing happens on a regular basis. And the more frequently it happens and the better that it happens, I think the better the schools are. So this is something that I see over and over again with issues that come up with children, whether it's an academic issue or a home issue. You have to be able to be flexible, and you have to be able to focus on the children's needs. And I think it's something, while I'm biased, of course, it's something I think our Catholic schools do very well.
Well put. In addition to some of the other content, Julianne listed her thoughts on 10 principles for leader preparation. I thought this was an interesting list. Did anything in particular stand out about the list, either in part or in whole, to the panelists?
So I was looking at these 10 principles. I was thinking about that the leaders are called to sow seeds, and it reminded me of a situation in our parish. Bob and I work with young people in the parish, and of course, and we also do some marriage prep, but when you work with young people, you end up working with their families as well, whether it's your intention or not, or at least that's been our experience. And so we get very friendly with a lot of the parents as they struggle to raise their children or in a lot of different situations. And so one Sunday, we were at Mass, and we were really struck by one of the parents who just seemed highly agitated. She is a single mother, the mother of 4 boys, and they kind of came in late, and she just really seemed out of sorts. And after Mass, she came up to us and was almost ready to cry over the fact that, she said, it's just getting worse and worse. The older my kids get, the more they fight me about coming to Mass, and the more that they dawdle, and the more that they make me late. And she said, and then she went on to say that this hour that I spend every Sunday at Mass is so important to me. She said, my life is hard, and to be in that hour with my God, to have the opportunity to pray, to have the opportunity to take the sacraments, to be surrounded by people of faith, she said, that really bolsters me and gives me the strength to get through my week. And she said, and it really hurts me when my boys behave so badly on Sunday morning. And so I asked the question, do you think they know how you feel about that? And she said, well, I'm sure that they do. I mean, they were raised Catholic. They should know how important this is. And I said, my bet is they don't know. And I really want to encourage you to honestly tell them how important this time at Mass is for you, and to ask them to cooperate in terms of coming to Mass. And so a week or so later we saw her, and the boys were there, and they were there on time, and afterwards she said, you just assume that the kids know what you believe and you know what you think, but in fact they didn't know how important this was to me. And she said it's really made a huge difference. And these boys have now grown. They're in various stages. One's engaged and a couple are in college, and but they still go to Mass with their mom. And I like to believe that her being honest and speaking to them about how important her faith is to her has really sown seeds in their family to, and if for nothing else, for them to respect their mom and the needs that she has. But I think they actually like the fact, too, that they show up as a crew, you know, with girlfriends and fiancés, and I think they feel that the parish knows who they are, and they are now responding to that.
Very good. Any other thoughts on the 10 principles?
I do think that what Maggie was highlighting in that story is that principle about being available and present. I think that in our work, especially those of us who are in youth ministry, I think Maggie's point is really critical, that our work, although it's primarily with young people, we have to minister with our young people in their context, and that means their families. And so I do think it's very, very important for pastoral leaders in youth ministry to make sure that we have steady contact with the parents, so that parents know that we're available, that we can be present, they can talk to us about the issues, the concerns they have that are going on in their families. I think it's a very, very good pastoral principle for us.
I think a good attitude for us would be to be like the father of the prodigal son, that we would be waiting and looking for him coming from afar off, and be prepared for him to come back without questions, without barriers, and just be ready to embrace him.
Very good. So, is this the McCartys, this photo?
I was going to say that's our beautiful baby, our last grandchild, Catherine Ann, and on her baptism day. She is, as you can see, she's wide-eyed and wondered, and actually being pretty good there. That's the last time we heard her quiet. She's 3 now. She talks nonstop. So, but she's a great bundle of joy, red-headed and blue-eyed and totally inquisitive. That's our Catherine.
Well, some of the neatest conversations I've had with my own children are about theology, and Julianne discusses the need to assist families to discern where God's already present and working in their lives. I think part of the challenge presented is that everyone is in a different place in their journey, and they're learning. Discernment is a process. Any thoughts on how we approach discernment, the concept of discernment with a variety of families in different places and that have different needs?
You know, I had a thought on this that I just wanted to say, which is that I often find that our daughter is timid. She'll ask us a question and say, you know, well, what should I say or whatever. And we really worked at trying to make her kind of know that she knows the answer. She's just not used to using the language of church with her children. And so I think that that's one of those principles that we can be encouraging of families. That you know, you've got this. They don't have to go to the professional. They don't have to ask Father. They don't have to ask the pastoral ministers. They've got this. They know more than they think.
It was so funny when Thomas and I were having this conversation on the floor. Our daughter Shannon was overhearing us, and after I was finished talking to Thomas, Shannon said, "So, Dad, what did you tell him?" And like the good pastoral minister that I am, I said, "Shannon, I'm not telling you. You got to make up your own answer." So, okay, I'm just kidding, but it highlights I think a critical principle. One of my favorite adult learning principles says that we as adults are experience rich and language poor. That oftentimes we don't have the words to describe our experiences. Well, I believe that wholeheartedly about young people. I think young people are experience rich when it comes to the experience of the spiritual, of mystery, of the transcendent, but they don't have the words to talk about it. And so I'm finding that one of the critical pastoral principles or challenges for us is can we help provide a language for adults so they in turn can help provide a language for their young people. One of my favorite examples around this is when you talk about faith with young people. And in fact, the principle actually holds, and the technique holds with adults. But when you talk about faith, it sounds kind of abstract and nebulous. But by using contrasting images, we can become a little bit more concrete. So for instance, when we ask our young people, is your faith more like a pillow or a rock? Is your faith more like planting a garden or mining for gold? Is Jesus more like a friend or a coach? And what happens is prayer more like talking or listening? the idea is that obviously all the answers are correct, but it gives a language so that people can engage in God talk. And so I have found that that's one of the challenges for us in pastoral ministry. Can we help adults develop language, and then therefore can we help them pass on that language to our young people? But one of the other things I would just remind us of that sometimes language is nonverbal. And I was thinking about how my daughter carrying Thomas to communion one time, I watched her as she took his hand and traced the sign of the cross. And I thought that a nonverbal prayer, teaching him the behaviors of faith. And I was really struck by that. But it does remind us that it's underlying the work that we do is to help parents find that way, verbal and nonverbal, to engage in God talk with our young people.
Absolutely, and I love that comparison of, you know, is God like this or like this? Is your faith like this or that? And I've used that with adults in an adult formation class for ministry, asking them, is God more like a small town close by or Las Vegas? And they have to get up and actually go stand by one place or the other, and they're looking at me like I'm crazy. But then they have to tell why they chose that. And I jot the answers down on the board so everybody can see it. And everybody comes to the understanding by the time we get done with the exercise that, first of all, we put God in a little box. And God is so much more than that. And it expands their images of God, and the reasons why they see God in all these different ways helps them to see God in everything. And then when you're talking with them about their families and talking with parents, helping them to recognize the God moments in their lives. Mom rocking the baby, snuggling with the little one reading a book, getting that first dandelion bouquet, taking one child out for driving lessons. Yes. But those are all God moments, and any time that we can help our parents recognize that and celebrate those little God moments in their lives, that's a blessing.
You know, you can tell Bob and I really like our grandchildren, and the 5-year-old was in, you know, a preschool religious ed class, and he came home this is just a few weeks ago, and he was asking Bob, who we call God, no, I'm just kidding, asking Bob the question. He was like, you know, Pop, we just learned about heaven, and that when we die we go to heaven. And then he got all serious, and he was like, Pop, will you be there in heaven with us? And so that was a beautiful God moment as he was in it, you know, and Bob said, and oh yes, we'll all be there together as a family, you know, and when one goes before the other, we'll be waiting when the next person comes in. And it sort of just calmed him about this idea of when I die and go to heaven. Beautiful concept, maybe a little scary. So that we can have these God moments all the time with the young people, because I do believe that they are hardwired to ask these questions about God and how they fit in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well said. One of the most kind of touching God moments I experienced as a teacher is learning that my students were praying for my intentions in their other classes. In about 2001, my grandmother was hit by a car, and it was a terrible situation, and thank God she miraculously recovered. But for a long time, you know, she was in intensive care, and one of my faculty members said, oh, how's your grandmother? The kids are praying for you. And that was just overwhelming for me. What a blessing to see that it's extending beyond just the classroom and that moment. So all great examples.
I think oh, sorry, go ahead, Father John.
One of the things that I think helps is all of this really goes under, I think, the rubric of a vibrant Catholic culture, that whether it's in the family, the parish, or the school, we want to see all these things as part of the culture in which children are raised, right? And so that's one of the things that we actively promote in our schools, is to have a vibrant Catholic culture. And really a lot of these things that we're talking about, you know, having a good God language, you know, having a school where children naturally pray for those in need, whether they know them well or not. All those things, you know, it becomes kind of the soup that the children are steeped in, and it helps to form them into active practicing Catholics.
Absolutely, and you learn so much about what's going on in their lives that way when you have those conversations and moments with them in the school. And
You know, Father John's comment, though, I think is really important when you talk about creating that faith culture and that family culture. There was a study, it's probably 5 or 6 years old now, but the Gallup organization did a study of American teenagers, and they said that 1 in 3 teenagers, by the time they're 15, report a significant personal experience of God. A significant personal experience, 1 in 3. And when I first heard that statistic, I had 2 questions. One is, do they have a language, experience-rich language poor? Do they have a language to talk about that experience? And then the second, do they have a faith community to help them integrate that experience into their life? Do they have the domestic community, the domestic church? Can their parents help them understand that experience? And do they have that broader faith community, the church, to help them integrate that experience? So I think these principles are very, very closely related for us as pastoral leaders.
Bob, I'd like to think about this, the domestic church, because that was really the church of the home for me. I came from a mixed church family, and we didn't all go to church together. But the practices that we had at home around family meals, around the holidays, the things that we did share, that's what raised me in the faith, along with going to Catholic school. So about half of Catholic marriages are to people from other faith traditions or none, right? And even 2 Catholics have a diverse faith. So what's happening at home can be, and I think that we need to encourage people to understand that that's holy too, and that's an expression of the church.
I don't know if there's a way to back up a slide, Andrea,
Sure.
to the baptism slide, but that's my son-in-law in the center, and James is Southern Baptist. So Laurie, our family, my daughter's family reflects what you were just saying. And, you know, can you imagine the conversation they were having? Because Southern Baptists don't baptize children. And so when Thomas was born, we're all kind of waiting. And I want to say this to the pastoral leaders on this call, who are also parents. I had to bite my tongue not to say something to Shannon after the first week. When are we doing the baptism? After the first month? After 3 months? Because there's nothing I could have said that Shannon didn't already know. She had already absorbed the entire Bob McCarty message. So that was gone. But here he is, 9 months in. Shannon says, Dad, we've decided to have Thomas baptized. And I said, where? And she said, St. Timothy's, which is their local Catholic parish. And so on the outside, I'm cool, calm, and collect, but on the inside, I'm jumping up and down going, yes, 1 for the Catholics. But when I said to Shannon, why St. Timothy's, Shannon said, Dad, I want my children to have the tradition and the ritual that the church provides. And I just think it highlights what Father John was saying, and then what Laurie, what you were just building on here. It just highlights that need for that domestic church and the experience of being part of that community. And even in a mixed family, well, I call it mixed because James is taller than Shannon, but even when it's religiously mixed, I mean, that's an important concept here, I think, and I think it was reflected in this picture, in this slide here. So thanks, Andrea.
Sure. Well, this next slide in the upper corner here, these are my 2 little guys. That's us at the papal visit, and I remember watching some of the footage with the Pope arriving, and we brought the kids into NCEA. We were watching it on the big screen together, and my son said, "Why aren't we there? There's kids there. I want to go. I want to go there." And we had just moved to DC. I'd never been in the city by myself with the kids, and it was a push for me to take that risk and bring them into the city and do that. But I'm so glad I did, and they inspired me to do it. And I think it kind of flows into, you know, this next point that Julianne made about, you know, children the importance of children seeing their parents at prayer and that it's something truly important. But I want Father John to comment on his photo here because that's a pretty cool picture. Can you let us know what's going on there?
Yes, well, that picture is an example, a true example of the power of prayer, because for the last 4 seasons I've served with another priest here in Chicago as the chaplain at Wrigley Field. And so that's me saying Mass with some stadium workers, coaches, an occasional player comes to Mass, and we say Mass at Wrigley Field right there in section 209 on Sundays when there are games. And so as I like to tell the school children, 4 seasons ago we brought Jesus to Wrigley Field, and we've seen the team improve year over year until finally this year the power of prayer brought us the World Series title after 108 seasons. So if you don't believe in the power of prayer after that, you haven't been watching the Cubs.
It's the power of perseverance. Wow.
Well said, and flows perfectly into Julianne's point that nobody is nowhere in their journey. And she gave an example of the secret work of winter revealing itself in the spring, and she likened it to planting the tulip bulbs in her garden. And we definitely all face those kind of darker times or dry spells in the faith, as do all the families that we serve. Did anyone have some thoughts on that or want to share more about how those darker times can lead to some big spiritual growth?
Well, I remember a dark time in my life when my family came together to help me. My mother died suddenly when I was in India with my husband with the Christian Family Movement. And there was no way for me to get there, but my kids called me. They had jumped in the car and driven from Maryland to Detroit to be with her in her last moments. And there over the phone, like across the ocean, they prayed with me. And all the seeds that we had planted to bring them up in the faith were paying off for me as a daughter. Those darker times can be where the light of faith is shining.
Absolutely. Well, my dark time happened when one of the dark times when our son Nathaniel, number 5, came to me and said, "Mom, I don't want to be confirmed." So, stabbed me in the heart as a mother. However, I was also PRE in the parish. So I'm feeling like a double loser. I have failed on every front, and it sent me in search of a spiritual director. And in talking with my spiritual director, she said, "Kath, did you ever think that he's somebody else's bundle to carry?" Or to use Julianne's analogy, you've planted the seed and you've watered, but you've got to be patient, and now somebody else may be the person who will help him to move forward. He did talk with his father. My husband became a Catholic officially after 5 kids, after this particular son was born. And he talked to him about his own questions and doubts, but he said, but in the end it all comes down to Jesus and prayer, and I'm just comfortable here, and you just have to trust that God will be with you. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Maggie and I teach confirmation, and in our parish, they're all high school kids. And so we had this class of 12 kids, and the very first night we asked the kids on a scale of 1 to 10, whose idea was it for you to get confirmed? 1 is your parents' idea, 10 is your idea. And invariably, they're all over the board. I mean, they really do. They run from the 2s to the 8s about whose choice was confirmation. And one of the things, the very, very first night, one of the concepts that Maggie and I introduced to our class is that faith is a journey and not a destination. And we try to remind them that this is not an endpoint. This is not graduation. This is confirming your membership in the community. This is confirming your willingness to stay on the journey, even through the tough times and even through the questions. It was illustrated for me a couple years ago. I was doing a conference in El Paso, Texas, and at the end of the general session, a young adult woman, Maria, comes up to me and she's got tears in her eyes. And Maria says, I said, so Maria, what's wrong? And she goes, I think I'm losing my faith. And I said, well, what makes you think you're losing your faith? And she goes, I have so many questions. I have so many questions about the church and about God and about Jesus. And she goes, and I was always taught that to have questions is a sin. That for her and in her family, if you were challenging your spirituality, if you had doubts, if you were questioning, that was equivalent to a loss of faith. And I said to her, I remember so clearly, I said, Maria, I said, do you remember as a kid how you believed in Santa Claus? Yeah. I said, how old were you when you stopped believing in Santa Claus? And she picked an age, I don't know, 32 or something. I'm just kidding. I don't know how old she was. But I said, what caused you to do that? She goes, I grew out of that, and I grew into Christmas, into incarnation, into Jesus. And I said, that's exactly right. I said, when you have questions, it's not a sign that you're losing faith. In fact, having questions means it's a sign that you're ready to go deeper, that the faith you're in doesn't work anymore. It's time to go deeper. So to have questions is a sign of growth. It's a sign of spiritual maturity. But the key is to remember that it's a journey, not a destination, and there will always be different kinds of questions, and that's okay. The real challenge is to have the grace to stay on the journey. So that's just a reminder, in the midst of the tough times, it's time to go deeper.
Well said. Well, I think we are going to pause at this time for a brief word from our sponsor. We're going to see our webcams disappear for a moment, and we'll be back in a few minutes with some questions and answers from our panelists. So if you have questions, now's a great time to go ahead and put them in the question box.
From the makers of That Man Is You, one of the nation's fastest growing men's programs, comes an all-new program.
In this room right now, we have over 5,600 years of married experience. I want to ask us our first survey question, and that is, how hard is it to remain happily married? There's someone laughing already. Okay, that wasn't one of the jokes, okay? If you do those 7 things, those steps are going to divorce-proof your marriage. And I mean radically lower the probability that you'll get divorced. In this survey, the answer is 0. And when I say 0, every single one of those people had never been divorced. See, Christ doesn't want your marriages just to have enough. He wants your marriages to be super abundant. To unpack that depth in these 7 simple steps, we're going to use everything we have at our disposal. At times, we're going to stretch your mind with some of the most amazing science you could ever imagine. And we're going to test your faith. We're going to challenge you to live your high calling. We're going to tug at your heart in pretty much every session. So yes, it's okay to bring Kleenex.
3 months into the pregnancy, I sat her down for lunch and said, I'm just not ready to be a dad. I think I'm probably going to leave you.
And so it was a difficult time for us.
I literally died, and 1 second later I was standing at the gates of heaven. And the light in heaven is awesome because God is light. God illuminates heaven with his own glory.
He wants us to experience superabundant choice one.
I've been yours for longer than you could possibly imagine. I've loved and respected you since before you had a face. As we give each other everything tomorrow, let's give each other the promise of heaven as well. I have waited, and I am so glad that I do not have to wait anymore. I love you.
Live the love. It's real. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it.
Okay, we're just going to take a minute and bring our cameras back up.
This is my family.
That looks like a fun crew.
Quite a bunch.
Okay, we do have a few questions that we'd like to answer quickly. I know we're coming close to the hour, but we have a few we want to address. One, it came in, a couple of people were interested. How do you deal with a situation where parents feel that maybe they get a lot of pushback from their child and are afraid that kind of forcing them to participate in religious education or confirmation will, in the long run, possibly make them resentful or damage their faith or not want to be Catholic? How do you respond to those types of concerns? Who'd like to answer that one?
I think I'll jump in and share the wisdom of Bob McCarty, one of our other panelists, and my husband. And Bob always says things, you know, that he often says to parents, you get to make these decisions. You know, you don't decide whether or not your child doesn't get to decide if they're going to go to school or not. You know, you decide that. Your child doesn't decide whether or not they're going to get those vaccinations or not. You decide that because you make decisions throughout the life of your children, as they are children, that you know that will have an ultimate benefit for them. And so that we choose to be families of faith, and we choose to participate in a faith community. And in our household, we used to say things like, we're McCartys, we go to church. And so that was kind of a rule, and it really wasn't all that challenged. Because that's who and what we were. And if you're a McCarty or you're a child who lived in our household, we had a couple of foster kids who lived with us, we're McCartys. We go to Mass on Sunday. And so I would just encourage families to make that part of the culture, that they make that what their family is all about.
There's a second part to this that's really interesting. In the middle of our confirmation class, I know parents have heard this before. In the middle of a confirmation class, a kid says, "So Mr. Bob, why do I have to go to Mass on Sunday? Why can't I just pray to God on my own?" And you know, and it was interesting because that's a false question. The kid was making it seem like an either or, as opposed to a both and. And this really was luck beats smart. I said to the kid, "Do you ever go to the movies by yourself?" Well, of course not, because teenagers don't go to the movies by themselves, because if they do, what does that mean? Loser means no friends. They're not going to admit that. And so when I said to them, well, why not? And the kid says, right there in confirmation class, the kid says, it's more fun to go as a group. You have the same experience. You see the same movie. You talk about it afterwards. Sometimes people see things in a movie that maybe you missed. He said, it's just better all around to go with somebody else. And I said, and that's why we go to Mass on Sunday, because the good news is bigger than any one of us. And it takes all of us together to break open the Gospels, to know and to understand and to integrate Jesus' message. It takes all of us as the community of believers. And so I would just remind parents of that spirituality, religion, this whole spiritual enterprise is a communal operation. And we're Catholics. We are communal by nature. And so this idea of encouraging our families to participate in liturgy together, to participate in faith formation together, I think that's a critical sign here, because that's how we break open the good news. We need each other to do this well.
Yeah, I would just simply add that you know, the pushback is not surprising. That's going to happen. But more importantly than the pushback is that parents, first of all, know, especially when dealing with high school kids, that you are without a doubt the most important persons in that child's life. More important than teachers, more important than their friends, that you're the most important people in their lives, that they're watching everything that you do. All the messages are getting through. And if the message is that being a practicing Catholic is important to me as an adult, then that message is going to be transferred to the children. And the best way to have your children be practicing Catholics is for parents themselves to practice the faith. And so going to church is very important. I think also the role of the father is very important, that dads get the family to go to Mass. And so all those things are really, really important, and the pushback will come. But if they see you practicing and you emphasizing this in your own life, that's the best medicine, that's the best message that they can ever get.
Very good. We had another question. If you had any particular resources that you would like to share with our audience, recommendations for resources. And I know some of you do, so please share any recommendations you have.
Well, I would like posted the Catechetical Leader in the Third Millennium, which is the name of that document that I spoke about earlier. It's available on the handouts from this and on the New York Catholic Conference website. And it's a good reminder to us on how to be attentive to the varied needs of families as we minister to them in today's church.
My simple recommendation would be to pick up a copy of Praying as a Family, which is a beautiful book produced by the Nashville Dominican Sisters. We've used it in the diocese to distribute to Catholic school families and encourage the families to pray together. There's a lot of good ideas and some very good introductions to some of the devotions in the church that families can use, and different ways to pray together. So I'd strongly recommend that book, Praying as a Family by the Dominican Sisters.
I'd like to recommend to you the Christian Family Movement, cfm.org. If you go there, you'll find lots of resources and ideas for families getting together in their own homes, for a few friends to get together and plan some actions or service projects. It's a long-standing resource, cfm.org.
I was going to say I like the Book of Household Blessings, which I also think is put out by the Bishops' Conference. And often we give that to couples that we help prepare for marriage, just so that they have a resource to bless their new home as it happens, or to ritualize in prayer the things that happen within the household. So it's just a handy resource to have around.
Yeah, and I would encourage folks to look at the NCEA has a book, Raising Happy, Healthy, Holy Teenagers. And so I would advocate for that, and you can get that through nfcym.org.
And not to mention the website for Strong Catholic Families, Strong Catholic Families, Strong Catholic Youth, that one of the sponsors of this webinar. Excellent resources for families and ministers who are ministering to them.
Yeah, we don't have that website up here.
Well, thank you. And before we close, any final words from our panelists for our audience this evening?
I want to say trust. I want to say trust in God and trust in yourself, that you've got this, that love and trust in God go a long way to raising happy, healthy, and holy kids.
It's a journey, not a destination.
And meet people where they are.
Catherine and Laurie, I think you have to repeat that. I think you were both speaking.
I said, meet people where they are.
And I said, find some friends to be your allies.
Good idea.
And all I want to say is, go Cubs. Sorry.
On that note, I think we're going to let Michael say his final words here before we sign off. Michael, do you want to take over?
I don't know if I can top Go Cubs, but let me just say thank you to all of our panelists and to you, Andrea. As we conclude tonight's webinar, I invite all to visit our websites at ncea.org to see listings for upcoming webinars and to register for the remaining sessions of the Amoris Laetitia series. You may also find additional information, as Maggie so rightly said, at the Strong Catholic Families website, www.strongcatholicfamilies.org. Our next webinar will be held on December 7th at both 2 and 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and will feature a new set of panelists looking at some practical applications for helping families discern God's movement within their lives. Thank you, Andrea, and to all of our panelists for sharing your expertise and your experiences with our members this evening. And thanks to all of you in the listening audience for your great questions and participation. May you each enjoy a blessed evening and an abundant Thanksgiving.
Many thanks.
Bye, folks. Thank you.